Hello and welcome to Conversations in Close Protection with your hosts Chuck Randolph and Chris Story. Our goal is to engage the greater protection community, inspire innovative thought, and as always, continue the conversation around all things close protection. Let's see what the guys are talking about this time.
This is Conversations in Close Protection. My name is Chuck Randolph, and across the digital divide, the antediluvian himself, Mr. Chris Story.
What?
Actually, you're not really. You're antediluvian.
Okay, go on.
It basically means like old-fashioned.
This is true. I am antediluvian. Nice. Probably not gonna use that in a sentence anytime soon.
You should try.
You probably wait your whole life for that.
Actually, I think I've told you this before. Every time I'm reading and I see something, I pop open the OneNote and I drop in like, oh, here's a new one. So I have a whole list of things.
You could order one of those at the bar. I'll take an antediluvian, please.
What would be in an antediluvian? It probably would have some type of rye whiskey.
No, those are it's called old fashioned, right? I mean, it's like a synonym for that, right?
Oh, I see what you did there.
Yeah.
I see. Nice. Rich Woods just went, whoa, I want one of those. So, absolutely awesome. How you doing?
Nice. Good, man. Good.
Did you travel or no last week?
No. No travel.
I just got back from
a little excited
vacation.
Nice. Oh, that's right. Yeah. I did no travel. I drove to Oakland for Supercross, which was awesome and also exciting on the way back. I almost died. But let's talk about Costa Rica.
I didn't almost die, but many of the times. So I stayed at a small beach town and it was awesome. But sometimes driving, I was having a couple little like flashback moments like, oh, I've been on this road multiple times.
Yeah.
Because it was, some areas the roads were great and then all of a sudden it just went to, hey, it's dirt or it's a lot of ditches. But it's a great, really good time to unplug.
Yeah. I was following this car back. My freaking puppy is losing her mind. I was following a Tahoe back in the fast lane, and the guy, it was an erratic movement, but he just kind of pulled over, and it made me think like, I'm not coming up on him fast. I'm not doing anything. That was kind of weird. I'm not going to just dive into the gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Turns out there was a car that had T-boned the Jersey barrier.
Oh my gosh.
It was gray. It's at like, I don't know, it's like midnight. Uh-huh. And so it's just like choices, right? Hit the small stuff, It was sporty for a little bit, but driver's training.
There was one thing that we did experience when we were down there, and driving they recommend like don't drive unless you have to. And if you do, it's a harrowing experience, especially after night.
Right.
And we came across a truck full of gravel. It must have come up on the side to go by, because everyone passes on the right, correct?
Of course. Why wouldn't you?
And the shift in weight of the gravel, and there goes the road.
Right off the road. Yeah.
Little 2-lane road, and that pretty much put the stops on everything for a while there. But yeah, I mean, other than that, a little diving, little swimming, little hanging out, reading, not doing much. So it was nice reminds me how nice it is to get away. But then, you start, as you get ready to travel back, you start having to think about, you got to get a rapid test or a PCR test in order to come back to the US and all the other, happy stuff that goes with that you kind of reminds you that, yeah, I really don't like to travel anymore.
Right. There's that.
Now, I was talking to one of our prior guests. I won't say his name just in case, he wants to get poked fun of, but he's like, I used to really like to travel and I don't like it anymore. He's like, I kind of over the pandemic, I've gotten used to being home and seeing my family more. And he's like, now when I have to travel, and he's like, you got to wear the mask and everything else. He's like, it's kind of a pain in the ass.
Well, that, and I think it just kind of, at times it reinforces things that you don't like, which is, crowds or whatever. It's like a re-emergence or like a refreshing look at what becomes the norm, right? That frog in a boiling water, right?
Yeah.
And you get out of that boiling water, and the water's nice and calm and clean, and then you're like, cool, I miss traveling, and then you get there and you're like, no, I do not.
This is this is
sucks.
terrible. Nothing about but there's something about like the mask just makes it actually, though, is it the mask or is it what the mask does to people? Because if you're and most of the people that probably listen to this show are somewhat learned in traveling, or they've traveled at least 3 or 4 times, and you kind of get used to it. Like, look, I can take my carry-on only. I know what I can get away with. I know what I can get locally. Blah blah blah. But then you can it's always good people watching in the airport to see those folks. Like, you realize that person must not travel a lot.
Right. How is this your first time on an airplane?
Like, have you never had to show your ID to the TSA before?
Dude, I swear to God, they should not have a fast lane, right? They should have if you've traveled between 1 and 5 times, that's your lane over there. Get the hell out of everybody's way.
And then, like, I'm looking for my ID and I can't, and all of a sudden now I'm nervous because I'm in front of somebody in a uniform who looks annoyed, and I look around and the people behind me are annoyed, and then I realize, like, for some odd reason, I put my ID in my left sock in my boot.
Right.
And I'm going to basically strip down, and you're like, okay, sir, ma'am, you're going to need to move over to this other lane.
Right.
It moves a little slower for a reason.
For you, really.
Yeah.
Well, so I think that's the other thing is that, it's just a freaking avalanche of annoyance, right? So you get there, you're doing your thing, you're moving through, then you got to hear the TSA person think that they're witty with how they're telling you to do whatever, and the person in front of you misses like 90% of it, right? Hey, you got to take your shoes off. Hey, you have to do this, and you got to do that. You got to do the other thing. And then, of course, if each airport has its own set of rules. So here you've got to take your left shoe off. There you got to take your right shoe off and your sock. It's a mess.
And then I'm always the one that says, "Oh, you've been randomly selected." Of course I have.
Yeah. This just makes you go, maybe I'll just have somebody Zoom me whatever the beach looks like, and I'll call it a day. I'll just sit on my back porch and.
I mean, don't get me wrong. It was well worth it once we got there, and you kind of got on the beach, and it was lovely. But it's just, right before the holidays, we were talking, and I was traveling then as well, and there's a lot more people at the airport traveling for the holidays, and it was just people were wound up, and then I was thinking, like, is it the mask that I hate, or is it just the effect it already has on people that are nervous travelers and are not used to it, and there's less restaurants and bars and other things open at the airport, and I don't know, it is what it is,
Well, really, what it speaks to is first world problems. Right. It's like where you're mad that, like, I got to wait in a longer line. I couldn't get my latte. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Especially because, we've been places that, people will ride on a bus with pigs and chickens and, you have to get in the back of a truck and do all these things, to go have heart surgery or whatever.
Well,
and be back to work on Thursday.
So we flew into Costa, and then we flew into a smaller airport. And the smaller airport was just a strip. There was no hangar, there was no nothing. There was just somebody, with a table on the side, and you came in, and on the way back it was a little interesting because suddenly they realized that they were overweight for the plane and the fuel ratio and everything else. So that's a story for another day.
A couple 100 kilos off the bird.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, what'd you say? We need to drop weight. We have to drop some kilos. I'm sorry, what?
Pardon me? Wait, that's not, you can't have my bag. Wait, what? We'll send it later. But all worked out, came back refreshing, back to work and back at it. So
nice.
And back here. So here we are, Shop Talk. I think the first one of 2022.
Here we are. Good things.
Yeah, I think one of the first things that we found that we wanted. Well, did you end up going to SHOT?
I did not. The reason I laugh is because a friend of mine sent me a text that said that I think I think SHOT Show is Burning Man for tactical people. Tactical.
It's possible.
Is freaking funny, man.
So it sounds like it was a good event. I mean, but it sounds like it was not as, like as is GSX, not as many people attended.
Right.
I haven't got a lot of feedback from folks other than kind of similar to yours, and that not a lot of people here, but a lot of vendors. But I don't know if there are folks out there that have comments about SHOT Show or something cool they saw. Chris and I certainly would like to get it or get that information so we can prepare and use that on a future show.
Yeah. I think the conference piece is just, the whole event space is a little bit depressed right now. Which is interesting because you see people locally, but I don't know, football games, not so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's freaking crazy. But like I said, I went to Supercross the other day, and I mean, usually you're hiking like across, it's in Oakland, so you have to park over by the bay, and then you walk across the bridge, and all the things. And this was like, almost like valet parking, right? I almost didn't know where I was because I was so close, and people are saying they're getting out, and a lot of them are just sitting their asses in traffic, but they're not really going anywhere.
Well, and getting out of Oakland altogether.
This is true.
No offense, folks.
It's true.
One of the other interesting things that we picked up for this week, and this is the first. I'm going to try to share this, Chris. We don't often get a chance to do that on the video, but let me share this. And that is the. See if this works here.
That looks pretty good, man.
Yeah. So this came from our buddy Ross Hill, who kind of flagged this for our attention, said it might be something interesting to share with the viewers. But essentially, it's the WEF global risk. WEF does they do a bunch of reports. One they do every year, though, is a risk report, and they talk about the top 10 risk factors for the next 24, in this case, the next 24 months. And I thought it was interesting, just to kind of look at these and put these in context, and then ask a question like, okay, if I'm in the protection industry, what does this mean to me, and what can I take from this other than like, oh yeah, extreme weather is an issue? I mean, what are your thoughts on this, Chris?
Well, so I would say, as you look at the forum's report, how do you decipher it in abstract, right?
Yeah.
Because that's 31%. Wow, that's high, and that's the biggest one. But what does that mean, right?
Right.
So I think you'd have to decipher it a little bit. As I look at it overall, I think what's interesting is it doesn't talk about resources.
Right.
So I mean, for the longest time, we've looked at resources an issue, water, or whatever the case is. But as you look at the weather again, and I think what we're talking about is extreme swings in the weather, right? So very, very cold, and then longer dry periods, which would result in droughts for most of the location. The livelihood crises, I think, is interesting too, because it's only, the variance in this risk reporting is only 52%.
Yeah.
Right. Essentially, or so they're all really closely aligned. But the livelihood crisis, I think, is interesting too, which is, clearly, I think what they're talking about is the ability for people to, feed themselves and their families and businesses, et cetera, growing with growing inflation. So, which is separate than the debt crisis, it would seem.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of this, I think, talks about inequality, or a belief of inequality.
Right.
That has been, essentially, I mean, one thing we know about the pandemic is whatever issue you had, it exacerbated it. And I think that kind of goes to maybe some more geopolitical or strategic issues as well. And I think since the pandemic, we've seen a lot of inequality issues that have been highlighted, to include and uneven economic recovery. And so I think all these are representative somehow of a growing a growing polarization as well.
Right.
Especially social polarization.
Right. Which, could be, I don't know if it's going to be completely solved by solarization, but I'm with you.
Well,
see what I did there?
Yeah, green energy.
So the other thing, the piece is that, again, the top 10 digital inequality. I think that piece is very interesting as well as, quantified by, we talked about it, right? First world problems versus, the ability to, somewhat communicate. But we've been in places, which is interesting. We've been in places that, don't have running water, but everybody has a cell phone. So you got to wonder, what does that look like? Are we just talking about because people don't have bandwidth or minutes, or,
and if, what happens? Well, and we have corporations now talking, not tongue in cheek here, about the metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen, social media companies, tech companies, all talking about this idea of the metaverse and what does that mean. And I was thinking about, like, okay, now we're digital inequality. My right to is my right to a digital, my right to be a digital citizen. Is it my, is it access to the internet? What does that mean at scale and in terms of the WEF report? And again, I think it all goes back to a need for, a need. Well, I don't want to say a need for equality, but there's definitely a feeling of inequality. And, you and I were talking about this before we turned the mics on, but, now we have things like algorithmic information being driven at us. What do I mean by that? Like, I like, I like hot chocolate. So I see a lot more ads about hot chocolate. Like, you like chocolate milk. So you see a lot more ads about chocolate milk. I never see anything about chocolate milk. Therefore, my bias or subconscious or unconscious bias is always going to go to what I see. So we have these digital feeds that maybe are knowingly, is it weaponized or not? And, I'm not saying that companies are purposely weaponizing the information, but is there some inadvertent weaponization of the information that's coming to us that just that continues to make this worse?
Well, I would say if you look at, I can't remember the name of the documentary on Netflix, but
yeah,
you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They said that it's absolutely weaponized, right? And at the end of the day, if you're being fed more of what you think you want or more of what somebody thinks that you want to see, you are, because if you look at what the measurement is for those tools, it's how much time is the user in your platform. What do you do? All of that helps make you money, right? And where do they go? And where can I find them? And that's why you get even these crappy cool games get interrupted by advertising because people are trying to find you wherever you are.
Well, it's interesting. It's a documentary. It's an HBO documentary based on a book, and we talk about the book on the podcast. But I can't remember the name of the dang book right now. But absolutely, they talk about those types of issues with the information. And you know what? I think it makes it dangerous too if you're a moderate. If you're moderately conservative or moderately liberal, that's like because everyone's pushing to the right and to the left. And if you're somewhere near the middle, even if left or right of the middle, I think it continues to be a space that, people look at you and say, oh, you're a pariah.
Right. Well, so the one I was talking about on Netflix was The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
Right? And so I'd say, it's interesting as you look at how it's all tied to, digital inequality, and then of course your social cohesion erosion, and then of course most all of this can be impacted by cybersecurity failure, right? Or just the 5G piece. And of course, we've talked about this before as well, the mental health deterioration, right? Just the stresses of everyday life that are suddenly affecting people. Not suddenly, I think people are just more aware of them because they've got time to stop and reflect, and they get out of the stream and they sit on the beach for a little bit, and then they go to jump back in the stream, like, this is not awesome. So I think the break for the world was helpful and healthy. I think that it'll take a little bit of mental health and fitness to find whatever that balance is people are looking for. But again, it does affect everybody. Stress, you see it everywhere.
And now I think something interesting for protectors about this is, people are like, Chris, Chuck, that's great. I appreciate all this. I believe, or, maybe have my own opinions on this stuff. But what should I take from this professionally? And I think, you look at these, and these are all indicators to violence and unrest, which squarely falls in our lap, both extremely in a tactical way of protecting those that we've been charged, but also as risk mitigators to say, hey, what should I be looking at, especially in areas that might be a bellwether to increased violence or increased unrest that I need to know about, as I'm talking to my clients, as I'm, making decisions, and as I'm trying to help drive informed activity.
Well, so yes, and if you look at essentially how you'd lay them out as threat vectors, right? The top 5 up there: economic, environmental, geopolitical, societal, and technological. 4 of them are societal breakdowns,
Mm-hmm.
right, and impacts, and that's kind of, across the board. I mean, in some places, we talked about first world problems. Those folks might have challenges, and the folks that don't have first world problems might be dealing with those other problems a little bit more resiliently, because they haven't had far to fall, if you will.
Yeah.
But it does give a different view of what you're looking at as you approach those different geographic locations and areas.
Yeah, and again, I think, these are things that, when people ask me, like, why should I read the WEF? Why should I get the Economist, the World in 2022, or what should I take away from, everyone's throwing out their 2022 issues and this is what's on the horizon. But, I think WEF is always a good thing to watch, because it is these are, air quotes here, leaders or respected or known leaders. I use both of those loosely depending on however your own personal viewpoint of them are, but they are folks that come together and think about these problems at scale. And then when they bring this stuff out, I mean, it's representative of what a combination of corporations and governments are thinking about, across the globe.
Yeah. And I think, these are clearly 800-pound brains, right? Which they're looking at a significant amount of data to bring to bear, so that everybody can understand what's facing, or what everybody's faced. So I think, you have to take that into account, right? I mean, because you may not see that in your space, right? At your level, right? Wherever you are in, Arkansas or the south of France, or whatever the case is. But as as you look globally, these are the risks that can become critical threats. Right?
Yeah, but Chris, I just want to get on a team, and I just want to get out there, and I just want to be a bodyguard. How does this help me? I just want to get my first gig.
Right. Well, it's balance, right? I mean, it all comes down to balance. I mean, I'm pretty sure whoever your principal is going to ask you, what are your thoughts on the, in the next 2 years, how much extreme weather is going to impact the business. That's not what's going to happen.
No.
But as you look out, when you need to, if you're going to go to Africa, if you're going to some other place, understanding that this is a significant threat, it can go back, and you can go back and look at, like, okay, great, where did this research come from? Is this going to be an impact on where I go from a operational standpoint? And that's the value of it. If you're a director, or if you're a vice president of physical security or risk, you're going to take a look at this as far as application of resources in a developing country, where you're looking at potentially conducting business. Completely different viewpoints.
And even if you're if you're a director, you're managing protection work, and you say, okay, we know where we're traveling. Maybe you work for oil and gas, or you work for something that goes out to more austere environments. You can look at this and add it as a layer to your travel risk program. Because and if you're an individual, like you said, hey, I just want to get, like we said, hey, I just want to get on my first detail, and you look at this, it informs you so that you can talk at a greater level towards things like mitigation, instead of just saying, well, what, if the boss should ask you, and because I have been in those situations where the boss asks, like, why do we do something this way?
Right.
Or why did we do this? And you're like, well, because, when we looked at the reports and we looked at the geographical or the geopolitical issues facing this area, these are the top things that we inform about. You think about extreme weather, and you look at your own company, if your company is involved in anything that touches the environment, well, it's likely that somebody is watching you and has an opinion on that. So that then, maybe speaks to groups of interest or people of interest. I mean, these are just, it's at some level, you're right. It's just like exposing yourself to this greater risk data.
Right.
And then at other levels, it's using the risk data to help discuss and drive resource or decisions at a higher level, instead of saying, hey, I just, I guess what we're saying is there's more to life than, soldier of fortune or something like that to get all your data from.
Right. Well, I think really what you're saying is we're trying to essentially arm people with the information so that they look like rock stars and look like, so you not look like, so you can be a rock star and be seen as part of the team rather than, I don't know, bro, it's just the route I picked,
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I'm the last line of defense, bro. That's all I know, So for context, I think just because the slide doesn't really show it from the risks, the top 10 risks, the percentage of respondents that felt that those were going to be the risks. So 30% of respondents to the survey felt that. So
yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, exactly. So again, I mean, these are interesting things to think about, especially it also lets you look at, like, if you look at this from a risk perspective and you're trying to develop maybe new business, you could look at this and say, who's involved in this area, who's involved in that area, or maybe look at up and coming businesses or other folks, and you can apply your trades to them and say, hey, look, I read this article, as part of this, I know you're involved in it. Let us help you with your risk management, et cetera.
Right.
Something else to think about.
The other thing is using this as a reference is, if you're like, well, hey, 31% of the people that contributed to this believe that it's, extreme weather or, social cohesion erosion and mental health deterioration, whatever it is, it gives you a start point to do more research about, where you're going or what is coming down the pike, and then other triggers and indicators that might push this up and down, right? These are just guesses and thoughts based on available data now, but something that could happen tomorrow that might shift all of this in completely different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. So something else that Ross and company kind of brought up that I thought was interesting for us to talk about, because it's timely right now, is the Russian-Ukraine situation.
Yeah.
If I'm sure you're the same as me. I mean, my feed is slammed with things about Russia, Ukraine, us bolstering, them bolstering, brinksmanship, all this. By the way, we've seen most of this before. Anyone who remembers the Soviet Union. And the thing I think is interesting is, we as protection folks and risk mitigators and risk leaders, often we don't get enough discussion around indicators. We talk about the issue, but if you hear the word trigger indicators or increase or decrease, these are some of the increase indicators and decrease indicators of likely escalation in Ukraine. And it's not so much to talk about these each individually, because you could add more to each of these. You could get, I mean, there could be hundreds that you could watch that would be indicators, but it's the idea of like kind of discussing, what is an indicator? What is a risk indicator? How do you use it? And how can it help inform either your detail or your program, Chris?
Yeah. So I think, it's funny because you hear on one side of things like, why do we care about the Ukraine? Right. And then on the other side of the, and then again, right behind that is Taiwan. Right. So we're facing things on two fronts, and the Ukrainian piece is a little bit more active, at least at this point, from what we're seeing. So, what Ross laid out here is interesting, right? And some of them are obvious and some of them are not. But, Putin's put 100,000 troops in the place, right? And all of these things are converging. Like, I mean, Russian, what was it, yesterday or the day before, Russian naval vessels were moving into the English, not the channel, but in that direction. Sorry, it's been a long day. So again, as you're looking for what's going on, again, like we talk about triggers and indicators for increased risk or decreased risk, it's also three-dimensional chess, right?
Yeah.
And I think what I really like about this, what Ross did here is that he didn't really add a bunch of conjecture, right? So if the U.S. does this, and if this is, it's actually, actual triggers that might indicate, hey, they're getting ready to get toward to move towards, actual invasion. I think the one thing that is interesting is the cyber tax piece, because we've seen that already, and that's the one thing in all of this that can be done by a third party, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because that is part of the new norm of conflict. I won't say war, but modern conflict is hybrid. I mean, a lot of it, the cyber piece continues, advanced persistent threat, and they go in the background, and then they are definitely an indicator of potentiality to move to the non-cyber piece or the physical piece. And we've already seen that it's begun. Hybrid warfare activities will always support military action, especially nowadays.
Right. But again, if you had an interest, essentially a disinterested 12-year-old, right, or organized crime or whatever, they could conduct cyber attacks on infrastructure within the Ukraine or surrounding areas. Turn the lights on and off a couple of times, whatever the case is, and that could be attributed to Russia, but it might actually accelerate thought processes, but it might not actually be the Russians themselves, right? So I just think that's an interesting piece in that.
Well, yeah, like you say, there's so many issues involved in this also that somebody else could stir the pot just because they brinksmanship is more dangerous now, I think, than ever, based on the digital piece as well. I mean, the idea of information, psychological warfare and information operations has been, that's not a new thing that just called up with cyber. It just cyber activity or cyber offensive operations or cyber defensive operations just makes it more nuanced and makes it more dangerous. I mean, we've already seen somewhat, and I haven't looked in the last couple hours, preparing for the podcast and all, but there's somewhat tensions have increased. There has been a lack of diplomatic talks, but more diplomatic activity is scheduled. Russian has already deployed combat forces and systems, enablers, and sustainment capabilities, to fight in the multi-domain war. But again, we're doing military exercises, which oftentimes can be used as a mask of military operations.
Right.
The only thing we don't really know right now is if Putin has actually decided to carry out military action or not.
Right.
But again, kind of like pulling this away from, this is as an example of Ukraine. It also, like the last slide or the last piece, helps us understand a little bit. Like if you think about, Chris, how do I have an intelligence asset that I have the ability to use. Maybe it's in a GSOC, or maybe I have money with one of the more bespoke outfits out there, from my company, and I can use them. How do I best use them, instead of saying, Chris, this is an area that you know as well, Chris. Like, hey, Chris, tell me all the dangers around this place. Well, great. Here's a 15-page report that doesn't really hit the mark on what you want because you didn't tell me. So let's talk about indicators of risk. Let's talk about, helping inform intelligence requirements for my detail.
Right.
I'm going to, you go to the, we think about the last story. We come to this one. Hey, I'm going to be operating in Ethiopia. Okay, well, what do we know that's going on there? Are there any issues? Of these issues, what would mark an increase in the issue? What would mark a decrease in the issue? So now you can say, hey, Chris, I'm going to Ethiopia. We've agreed on these triggers. Can you alert me if 3 of the 5 start changing, good or bad?
Right. Well, I think the other pieces in this is that as we look at this, a lot of people might go, well, what's in it for me? Like, why does this matter to me? Right. And of course, if you've got, business in the area, or business adjacent to the area or business that's impacted by a conflict, then it is going to start affecting you. And that's how you and your business. And we always go, hey, you got to know your business and know how your organization makes money to protect it. At the strategic level, right? A little bit less the operational level, and the tactical level, you're just kind of like, cool, you're just, driving from A to B. But you do want to take a look at this, because if you look at, gas prices, inflation, you look at all the things that are happening without this conflict, and then what happens, after the conflict, what will happen with oil, with shipments, with, transportation lines, God forbid your freaking, your Amazon orders get delayed again,
Well, I mean, kind of going back to the issue here again, you look at this on the decreasing issues, we see activities on the left, the increased stuff, Russia withdraws staff, naval incursions, cyber attacks increase, all that. Now on the decreasing side, you go back down to now we have Beijing Olympics, and now you have another big player in the geopolitical field who doesn't want their grand strategy interrupted, and like, hey, we're about to have the Beijing Olympics. Now that can go one of two ways. China gives a phone call to Russia and says, hey, do you mind? We're trying to do something here. And we really are trying to, make a good impression, because things ain't been going so well for us on, on the brand front since 2019, or, and is the response, sure, no problem. And then it's a cover for a quiet invasion or quiet occupation, if you will. Or is it an opportunity to back off? And, likely if they can survive without something happening throughout the Olympics, there'll be some cooling off period. The our evil members that were arrested in Russia, likely that Russia basically arrested some of their own cyber folks, and the issue there was that asked for by the US, and then Russia capitulated, and if so, what did the US offer in return for that? I mean, these are things I don't know, you don't know, that likely it would be something you need a high clearance to understand.
Right. Well, so it's all big. We talked about three-dimensional chess, right? We talked about the Beijing Olympics. The other piece is that China's gagging for Taiwan, right? Isn't it? We're talking about Ukraine, but if you look at the U.S. in terms of how we're seen or viewed in the rest of the world, if Russia did jump to Ukraine and start moving in and doing all the things, and we did whatever we said we were going to do. I think we put 8,500 troops in place, or whatever the case is, or they're headed. And then Taiwan or China goes after Taiwan because the U.S. is, hamstrung with the Ukraine piece. Then it's a significant emotional event for almost everybody, because everybody has some piece of China, from a business perspective across the world. I mean, it's going to be sporty.
There's a couple ways to use these ideas of like increased indicators. One, as someone, if you're a news hound and you look at the news and you want to try to get outside of the biases, you could do it yourself, right on a piece of paper if you're so inclined to say, here's the issues I'm watching, here's what I think the indicators are, and then tick them off almost, and you could watch your own issues and be more informed around it. You can use it in your day-to-day operations, very tactically. Like if I'm doing something around, we're on a certain building, what would be my issues? Obviously, if you're in a more risk environment, what are my increased risk issues that I need to look at, and what are the things that are going to decrease that issue? So I know I can either like pull back some of my resources and save them for somewhere else, or I need to increase my security resources. Something as simple as like maybe adding more surveillance detection folks, or adding counter surveillance folks, or adding more people to a detail, or adding more vehicles. I mean, this is also very good if you're in the event security or event risk management space as well.
Right. And I think it's a cool tool to see. I mean, I kind of jumped all into the global aspect of it, but as you kind of look back at this tool, for whatever event, what are my risk indicators that are going to increase this and are going to decrease this, and you're able to likely share it with every the stakeholders.
Maybe you're getting ready to ask someone to marry you, so you want to do this. What are the increased risks? She'll say yes.
Cons. Yeah,
what are the decreasing risks that she'll say no? I mean, it's it's a good thought process. I think also it helps you get away from bias, so you can look at some of these events and say, look, I know that we talked about the algorithmic information dump that happens to us at any given time. And being able to say, how do I get around that? How do I get outside of bias? And how do I get to the heart of the matter, which is understanding risk and mitigating that risk? And you said it when we were talking about the last piece, Chris, like the idea of like, hey, how do I be more informed? Which let's face it, I want people to see me if I'm in a protection space, whether I'm a leader or I'm an up and coming leader, as someone who makes, it's intelligence driven, operations led, or if you want to be cool about it, intel fed, ops led. Well, how do you be seen as an ops leader?
You got to be informed.
You got to be informed. You got to understand. You have that threat information around you. We've talked about this many times, and you have to be able to drive those indicators and all. So, and also, I know I don't want to give too many spoilers away on this, but in an upcoming Clubhouse, I know we're going to talk about 10K risk and what that means and how you can read it. And certainly once you take that 10K and you derive those things from that 10K that are important to you or your program or the folks that support your program, you can go to your analyst or yourself or have your team sit and say, let's talk about increase and decrease factors of each of these 10K risks that affect us at our optic.
Yeah. And I think, that's the important piece. One more before we move from that, I want to come up with one more point with this, is that the increase, calling up reserve, some other things like, you have to trust but verify, right? I mean, if you remember the first kickoff of the pandemic, right? Everybody's getting texts that, hey, my guard unit got called up, or my buddy's guard unit, or whatever, right? And so, you got to be able to verify those things, and the old info warfare piece is just becoming a bigger deal. So, that tactical pause, doing the increase and decrease in indicators, what does that look like, and how do you apply it? It's almost like a risk matrix, but just a different tool to support that.
Well, Chris, I recently listened to, and they're not a sponsor, but I listened to a recorded feature podcast about the value of open source intelligence. And the gentleman, gosh, I'm trying to remember his name here, but the gentleman who they interviewed works with Janes, and I'll find it. Maybe we can link it if I can go back in my feed. But you bring up a really good point about the reserves and trust but verify. And he talks in his discussion about the edge of OSINT, or the edge of open source, and where does open source go into the classifieds? And you're right. Many of the stuff that used to be classified, you can find in other places now. But again, you see something like, calling up of reserves, and all of a sudden you see that on your Twitter feed. Don't automatically assume that's true. Go verify that information through other sources, or through if it's even if it's important at that level, through a paid for source.
Right. Well, I think really what we're just talking about is kind of circling back to the info war, and just making sure they're not being misinformed or disinformed right before you run down the hallway with the hot off the presses, this is happening. And because it used to be, as soon as you got the information, right, and it came from a trusted source, you'd be rolling with it. But now, trusted is essentially, is
well, and that's why I'm we're big on those we say the same concept all the time: common operating information, common operating language, common operating picture, and the whole convergence of digital physical. I mean, if you're in an organization, you're going to run to the boss and say, oh my God, this is happening. Stop, take that minute, call your buddy that you've developed on the digital side, hint, hint, and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Is that what you're seeing? Let's present this. Because that ultimate decision maker, if he gets noise, all you're doing is increasing or decreasing the ability to make informed decisions. So enough about that. But I look forward to that upcoming Clubhouse where we talk about 10K risk and what that means. I mean, it's such a powerful tool, whether you're marketing or whether you're in an organization or whether you're trying to understand an organization that you're supporting from the outside.
Yeah, well, I think everybody talks about it, and you're just like, cool, just go to the 10K. You can find all the risks, and translating that for the protective professional, or even the physical security person, and even cyber, right, is paramount. So I think just us doing that will be helpful.
So I know that you recently listened in on a conversation around like the SOC of the future that Felleman Company had put out. What I was sad that I didn't get in on that, but hey, I was busy drinking something with rum down in Costa Rica. So what were your takeaways from it?
As well you should have, and as well you should be. So I think those things are great. So it was interesting because so it's a bunch of analysts at I think like a regional level, some folks from providers and some other folks, and they're talking about the SOC of the future and what it looks like, and they were also talking about the two things they were really talking about was what does it look like, evolving that, because Phil likes to say SOC in the pocket, and how powerful your phone is. And then they were talking about this as yet to be named security leader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is supposed to, help make decisions, the decision maker, right? The translator, right? The nerd whisperer, if you will. And
the nerd whisperer.
And I was just shocked at the thought process of these folks that were like, nope, we can't make decisions, right? We're not capable of making those decisions, and we only focus on this. And it seemed like this circling of the wagons around their thought process about analysts or operators or whatever the case is. We only do this, and we only we're not capable of speaking the language of business, and somebody else has to do it for us. And I was just really shocked at that people would just abdicate that leadership responsibility for fear of making a decision. And I get it. If your job has been historically to provide information for somebody to make a decision, that's one thing. But I think over and over we see security professionals of great background get a seat at the table. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as they're done delivering what they're going to deliver, they push away from the table and go sit in the back of the room. And so, when do we go, hey, we're value to the organization. I don't have to sit in the back, I can sit at the table. I understand the business. I can make business decisions. And I'm a security expert. So I think if you look at people, and I've said this before, I have great respect for, use the tech space, for example, a CEO who's an engineer, because they know their business, they know engineering, they know business. It's not that difficult, but security people and intel people have a hard time. That it's like, I can only be this person because this is how I identify, and somebody else has to take the reins because I'm not capable. And it's shocking.
Well, it's interesting. It shows maybe, and I'm sure there's folks out there shaking their fists going, I don't believe that. I mean, I can already think of several CSOs I know that came from the EP or the Intel background that are like, who are these people? Give them my number. I'll talk to them. But I think that, it's scary to do something new, and it's scary to come out with, if you're right, if my job has been analyzing, producing a spreadsheet of things that we've all been talking about, triggers, indicators, all these things, but I've never been in the course of action development field.
Right.
Man, that's scary. And
or I've never been responsible. I've just said, here's the information, you make a decision. Well, what would you do? Like, well, I don't do that. I just give you the information. Well, you have a thought,
And conversely, if all I've ever done is proverbially kick the door, or stand, right, and I'm making decisions that are all gut based, and now you're asking me to develop courses of action and do risk mitigation decisions and all these, now we have to speak business speak and all that. I would say to any of those folks, like, okay, it's okay to step in, as the Air Force might say, step into the blue and learn something new. But also, like, this is why you hear the idea of like, look, we, we're leaders. We're risk. We're business. Let me put this a different way. We're business folks. Our business just happens to be security. I mean, that's why we can find that line. And that's why we always stress you need to learn business speak. You need to read the Wall Street Journal. You need to understand. You need to understand WEF and triggers and indicators and all these things, because the moment that they pull the center seat out may only happen once. And your answer should be, okay, here we are.
Right.
Right. Because who is best arrayed to make risk-based decisions? Let's think. Is it the postman? I mean, no. Maybe. I mean, I guess it depends on what kind of risk you're making. But at the end of the
background is, right? Yeah, I got it.
But at the end of the day, I mean, protectors and intel folks make great risk leaders because they live it.
Right. It's just this hesitance to hold on to it. And part of the conversation was, do they need to know security? And the thought process was like, nope, no, they don't. They just need to represent us. And you're like, I'm like, what is happening?
Wow.
Right now,
I feel like I need to call Phelim and ask what was going on with that.
Hey, dude.
And again,
it's on YouTube. We'll throw it in the link. I just think it's shocking that where you have a lot of people who are vying for leadership in the space.
Yeah.
As soon as there's discussion or thought to put one foot in the business, right? People are like, oh, no, not doing that. And these are very eloquent, subject matter experts in their field.
But I will point one thing out, and is there's nothing wrong if you want to be an individual contributor and your thing is intel or protection, and that's all you want to do, and that's your calling. I say to you, then be all you can be.
There's a lot of slogans going on.
I know, man. I just realized I'm wearing my old unit thing today too, so I must be thinking about it from the Ukraine triggers and indicators. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's nothing wrong. I mean, we talk a lot about leadership and stuff like that. And if what you want to be is the analyst, be the best analyst you can be.
Right.
If what you want to be is a protector, be the best protector you can be. However, I would challenge you that the best protector or the best analyst is one who thinks three-dimensionally.
I agree.
Now, analysts are out there. I think three-dimensionally every day, Chuck. But do you?
Well, I think the hard part in it is to listen to a panel of them, or a panel of protective intelligence managers, or SOC, whoever's, and then freaking they're like to a person like, oh, nope, we need somebody in there to champion us. It can't be me.
Yeah, see, I think the issue though is, again, like if you're talking about future security or future, if your job is like, I want to be an intel analyst or protection guy, or I want to be a cook or whatever it is, be that person all the time, but recognize your industry is a feeder for leadership. And leadership, in my opinion, is a career in and of itself that's fed by many things.
Right.
But if you're going to be a risk leader, I mean, a feeder into risk, who better to make those risk decisions than those folks that are either informing or on the edge.
It becomes more challenging because, those folks who are like, not us, we're not doing it. Then somebody else steps up and then they're like, well, why is that guy doing it? Or gal, and they're like, well, because they're not afraid,
As a good colleague of an old colleague of mine, Paul Vanel, said once about the British Army, the only thing they hate more than change is what they have. So, I don't want anything to change. I don't want to be the leader, but I certainly didn't want you to be the leader. But so can we just put someone in that exactly does what we need him to do? And I mean, the only person sometimes really sometimes to represent where you came from is someone from the pool.
Right. And I think if that's the case, if people are willing to just go, yeah, whatever, right? Let the guy from marketing come in. They're great. They're a great guy. Then you deserve whatever happens, right, in your space.
Yeah.
If that's your after you, I have a hard time with that.
But I think it goes back to, you challenge yourself to listen to a different book summary every day, to get, not because you wanted to like dry your brain, but because you wanted to increase your business acumen. I challenged myself a long time ago to outreach and start, looking at digital things and other stuff because I want to increase my business acumen. If we live in the same space we always live, I would challenge, then you're a crappy analyst. Sorry. And if you live in the same space you always live as a protection person, you're a crappy protection person, because things are changing around you. Like you said, you've got a smart computer in your pocket. We've just talked about, things like 10K risk and all these other things. I mean, the world continues to change around you, and as a result, you need to continue to change and try to stay on the cusp.
Yeah, it was just interesting and a little disappointing, but it's only a handful of those.
We've kind of been wound up a little bit over that here. On
but dude, I was fired up. I don't know if I was just, I don't know if I was doing a workout or whatever. I had to stop and freaking, be like, what the hell's going on? Like write notes.
Well, I mean, it's
crazy.
I'm going to go watch that because is it possible that we just misconstrued what they said? But I mean, I feel the best leaders come from protection and come from Intel.
Yeah. Well, they can. I think, so this is another interesting piece, right? So as we segue into leaders and leadership, because, I don't want to freaking beat that other thing up too much. You can take a look and we can talk about it after the fact, after you look at it. But I think one of the things that was talked about, I think previously on Clubhouse, Ivor Terrace talked about it, we've talked about it, is a lack of leadership training, right? Or education, we'll call it leadership education in the space, right? Yep. And so I think what we find is, a lot of business leaders have, and when I say a business leader, like they're a professional, engineer or a professional security or whatever, but they also have some level of leadership training, like business or a business degree or postgraduate, whatever the case is. So they're specialists in two areas, right? Which is what we're seeing. And we tend not to see that as much in the security space. And so I think, great leadership is great leadership. Whether it's informal, right? Whether you learned informally by trial and error, or you were tutored or mentored or whatever the case is, or whether you had some level of formal education in leadership. And there are very few security-based leadership schools or training, that help you, become a manager or detail leader or director, or whatever the case is.
No, it's true. There are some out there. There are some for CSOs and, some that OSAC and other places put on, but there's not a lot for that transition. And from that transition from, like I'm running a team to now I'm running a program, I'm running a program to now I'm running a division, or,
right.
And I think there's an opportunity for it, but it also needs to be a learned opportunity. It can't be a bro science or a cis science thing where like, hey, I did this because,
right.
Because at some level you're gonna get eaten up in the business, right. whether your business is running your own business to support others, or whether your business is internal, running a business line, or being the CSO or something. But I think you're right. We've spent a lot of time talking about it. We've talked about it at the IPSB quite a bit, and I think we're ripe for something to direct and educate those up and coming leaders. So, and that's something else. If you're looking for mentors and you say, oh, I want to go have this individual as a mentor because I know they've done a lot of work, you have to re-examine your mentors at least once a year to say, okay, Chris has been my mentor for a while. I feel like I've gotten what I need from this relationship. We'll still be friends, but I need to go somewhere else to expand my horizons.
Right. I need to grow. And I think, we talked about it before as well, is planning your future. What roles do you need to be in order for you to land where you want to land? Right. I think a lot of people just kind of like go by Braille and they're like, cool, I ended up over here. And then they get mad at the person who spent 2 years as a supervisor, 2 years as a manager, 2 years as a director, and then 2 years as a vice president, because you're like, well, how do you deserve that? Well, because that was my plan and I executed it and I got training and mentoring and coaching and I took a risk.
Excellence is not a mistake. Excellence comes from repetition of the things that are going to work. relentlessly looking at those things and changing them as soon as they're not working and developing new habits. And something else that it might be hard for people to hear sometimes is especially if you're in a corporate environment, you might need to step away from security and go somewhere else and take a stretch assignment in somewhere else, like finance or marketing, or people are like, what are you even talking about, Chuck? But because it also shows the organization that you have the wherewithal and the ability to expand and operate in other environments and then come back.
Well, it gives you depth and breadth, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, yes, I'm a subject matter expert in security. Great. If you're in a paper company, how high can you go, right? There's probably only one area, but if you take a role in marketing or production or whatever the case is, even events, which would be, similar, right? I mean, that would give you a significant amount of experience,
exposure
within the company to what happens and what everybody's doing. That would be a great opportunity for folks to learn and grow from.
If you're running your own business, I mean, I go back to what you said, like, hey, look at your mentors, look at the folks that are advising you and say, okay, great, they're all security or they're all intel folks, they're all former agency or former something.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. Why don't you go down and find that retired CEO or go down and find that retired CFO and say, hey, can I buy you coffee or a beer or whatever once a month and just talk to you and ask all my questions that I'm afraid to ask to anyone else, but I can ask you, you can educate me things about things like P&L or the 10K or, things that I, or a marketing plan, things I don't really know, right. That I don't do daily.
Right. And people love talking about what they did and love talking about themselves and sharing knowledge. I just think, I'm not backwalking this at all. Right. And I think that, people who will listen to this, will have opinions. And I have a great appreciation that Felon put it on, because it is good to hear what at least, some people's opinions are. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them.
No.
But I just shocked.
Well, that's how we change the industry, though. If we all sit in an echo chamber and just say, yep, whatever he said or she said is great. I mean, and of course, if you have your own thoughts or ideas about this, maybe something we missed or something you want to add, protectiontalk@outlook.com. Add it. We can talk about it at an upcoming shop talk or an upcoming episode. And, we always do appreciate, and we always get a fair number of people after each episode that come in or chime in, texting you, Chris, or me, or coming in through email or through LinkedIn that say, I agree, disagree, or I would like to see something else. So,
yeah. Well, discourse it helps bring out positive friction, right? I mean, if we don't agree, it doesn't mean you have to, throw down, but maybe we can come to an agreement that makes it better for everybody. You don't have to compromise on everything, but understanding is the key too.
And like we talked about earlier in this episode, I mean, we are at a point, and as some of the stuff that Ross shared with us, we're at a point where, polarization is happening. You need to take an opinion, and if you're not with me, you're against me. And I think you're right. The more that we can have discourse, and the more we can have civil discourse. I mean, I get all the memes and all, like, warriors are not unafraid of violence and all. I get all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I mean, if we can't share opinions that make us go back and say, well, I'm going to go research that. May not change my opinion, but it may. I think that probably helps us as a society, but that's.
Well, I think it does help us as a society if we understand both sides of the issue, right? And I think that if you'll see people who are great debaters who, oh, what about this? Somebody will throw something down on them. They're like, well, what you're talking about is, and you're able to lay it out, and you're more likely to at least sway opinions or educate as to the full story rather than the other than just partially.
Yeah, this isn't us saying surrender to everybody and roll over and show your belly. This is just saying, you use all your weapons to your advantage, even information and discourse.
Oh, look at you!
Did I say that nicely?
You did. I don't know. It's definitely not saying roll over. That's for sure.
Yeah, no. I mean, but I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you, though. Like, the best way to win an argument is with facts, and not like, hey, I heard on the internet.
Right.
Okay. No. So anyway, so what's coming up on Clubhouse?
So first off, I'm very happy to announce that I actually have stuff that I put on Clubhouse, which is helpful.
You got crib notes.
Yes. So allow myself to introduce what we're doing on Clubhouse. Okay, cool. So Clubhouse. So next week, Monday, January 31st, deciphering the 10K to determine risk. Sweet. Monday, February 7th, PSD, what it is and what it isn't. And I think that's gonna be a good one because well, this whole Ukraine thing and Taiwan, I mean, it could make a big resurgence, but I think we're going to look to demystify some of that, and we invited some other folks on that. Then February 14th is Valentine's Day, so no Clubhouse. Get your sorry ass out and spend it outside the, exactly. And then Monday, February 21st, firearms and executive protection round 2. So that was a great discussion. We actually went over on that one, and so we talked about firearms and training in EP. So now we're going to talk firearms and EP round 2. Getting. I think on the last one we kind of got out of the holster. We got all the equipment sorted out, all the guns sorted out, all the things sorted out, and then now we're moving forward into the training space. It'll be fun.
Yeah. So, and if you're curious about any of those, find us on Clubhouse. We've said it before. If you need an invite, reach out to Chris, reach out to myself, reach out to us on the email, and we'll get you an invite so you can get in on those. Definitely, it's a great vibe. It's more of an open conversation, and I think it's it's a great addition and supplement to the podcast.
I agree, and I think the cool thing about it is that it's interactive, right? Yep. So it's not just us babbling about whatever. I mean, that is partially what it is, but everybody else that's in the audience can chime in. They can give their experience. They can ask questions. They can, give their opinions. And we do have some great leaders in the space at all levels, chiming in. And we do have some international participants as well. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been the first Shop Talk of 2022. I think we've done a pretty good one on this one, and with the items that we have.
We went so high level on this one.
It's fine.
Sorry, folks.
It's fun. We got to do that every once in a while. Yeah. We'll get back to tactical stuff in a while. We kind of go through that cycle though, where we kind of hit these and then we kind of get back to some more tactical stuff, and that's coming up. And we have some excellent guests. Speaking about Taiwan, we do have some excellent guests coming up to talk about what's happening in Asia and what's going on and what's happening in the protective space. And I know we've got some stuff that you've participated in that we're just waiting on a release, so we can bring those out and talk about them. And then of course just the general shop talk and other things. So with that, wash your hands. I'm sorry. With that, my name is Chuck Randolph. This is Conversations of Close Protection. And of course, across the digital divide has been the antediluvian himself.
The antediluvian.
Yes,
thank you.
Mr. Chris Story, wash your hands, watch your six, and keep your heads down.
Good times.
You've been listening to an episode of Conversations in Close Protection. Email us at protectiontalk@outlook.com and find us on your preferred podcast platform. Please take a moment and consider rating us to help others find Conversations in Close Protection too. Look for us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and other social media spots. Conversations in Close Protection is brought to you by your hosts Chuck Randolph and Chris Story. Our engineering editor is the mighty Aaron Peck. Please remember that all opinions expressed do not represent those of any organizations or companies the hosts are affiliated with. This is Rachel saying watch your six and keep your heads down.